All right, so I'll probably have to still add people in as they join. I just want to thank you guys for spending a little bit of time with us tonight and getting to chat with Allison Maurer. She is a very, very good friend of mine. We worked at the University of Colorado for almost 4 years together. She came there as our registered dietitian and then also worked as an assistant strength conditioning coach. And then she left not too long after I came here to WT because she missed having me around, I'm sure, too much. And came and went to the University of Tennessee, and she spent almost 10 years there working with all the sports there, and then has since been with the Pittsburgh Pirates organization, working in various modes of their sports nutrition and fueling. So she can probably talk a little bit about that here in a little bit, but I want to thank her for giving us some of her time while she's still at home in Knoxville. And also on the side, she kicks butt of some high school athletes at Knoxville Catholic High School, so back in the weight room and gets after those high school kids. So just wanted to start off with a couple of our questions. I had some questions submitted from our student athletes and from our coaches. So we'll just kind of start going through all of those. Get a couple more people in here. So first question for you, Allison, is on days off, what should my diet look like versus hard training days?
Great question. So first of all, I just want to thank you, Sarah, for having me, and appreciate all you guys being on here. I know you probably have a lot of other things you might rather be doing, but obviously nutrition and fueling is important. And since you all have a lot of time right now, now's the time to focus on it. Right. So I looked over some of these questions, and probably some of the answers are not as glamorous as you would expect. But still, I'm excited to give you guys some insight. So on off days versus hard training days, for sure there is a difference. And obviously the amount of time that you're spending working out versus when you're not. And so one of the resources that I will direct you to is if you do Google Images and go on the it's the performance plates. If you Google image performance plates, the Olympic Training Center has some really good examples of different performance plates. One is for a heavy training day, one is for a rest day, and one is for a moderate training day. And so the visual is really helpful because it shows you not necessarily from like, let me count my macros perspective, but more of like, what should my plate look like? How should I build it for those different scenarios? And so obviously, and it's different too, like if you have a weight room workout versus if it's conditioning, or if it's like, 2+ hours of practice. So obviously on the days where you have hard conditioning, or if it's extensive practice, you do want to focus on carbohydrates more than you would on days where you're just in the weight room, where you would focus more on adequate protein and maybe even a little bit more protein. And with that, to kind of just continue on, making sure you're getting the carbohydrates at the appropriate times. And so if you are one that you have a morning conditioning session and you don't eat anything before, which is fine, like we can get into that too. Like for so many years, it was like, make sure you eat something before you work out. But over the course of time, I've just learned some people can't tolerate that. So if you can get something before morning workout, great. But if you can't, you still need to optimize refueling with carbohydrates throughout the day. Because if you ignore that and neglect it, by the time dinner comes, then you're so hungry that all you want is carbs. And by that time, your muscles are like, well, this is great, but it's late. So I'll kind of recover, but I'm not really going to do a great job. So those harder training days, like I said, just focus on getting, meals and snacks with good quality carbohydrates, whole grains, not chips and Oreo cookies and French fries, but your whole grains. Fruit is a great carbohydrate source. I think a lot of people forget, yes, fruit is its own food group, but it's also a carbohydrate. If you do your potatoes, sweet potatoes, brown rice, whole grain pasta, that sort of thing. I mean, those can all be really great resources. Days that you're lifting, you still need to recover after those lifts. You just may not need as much carbohydrates. And throughout the day, just focus each meal and snack getting protein and carbs during that. So I know that's not like the greatest answer, but that visual, the Google image visual of the performance plates will really, really help you to just be like, oh, okay, I get it. That makes sense.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was in one of the handouts that we provided all of our student athletes in the spring. On one of our handouts was all the performance plates. So
nice.
yeah.
So you guys are all familiar with it already.
Hopefully, if they actually looked at that. So the next question from one of the student athletes is, what can I do to lose a couple pounds but keep all my muscle mass?
So great question. So with this, and one of the things in the Pirates organization that we look at, we don't look at, and somebody asked questions about body composition. We don't look at body fat percentage anymore. We look more at frame size and what's called somatotype. So what does your body look like? And so with that, we have a lot of guys who are trying to keep muscle on, but have a tendency to gain belly fat or just gain fat throughout the course of the season. So what I suggest, to maintain that muscle mass, you want to kind of compound your carbohydrates earlier in the day when you're using them. So like I mentioned, if you're not recovering and refueling after workouts and all you want to eat at night is donuts and ice cream, well, that's a problem. So shift your carbohydrates to earlier in the day. So you get a good source at breakfast, you're getting a good source at a snack, at lunch, and then at afternoon snack. And then when it comes to dinner time, focus mostly on the protein and the vegetable, and then your carbohydrates can come from fruit. And so that's a way to be able to still maintain that lean mass, but then kind of slowly see some of that fat just shed off, a little bit more efficiently. And then also just being consistent with when you're eating. And so our bodies like to be on a schedule. And so one thing that I tell athletes is, like Saturday and Sunday, those are actually days too. So Monday through Friday, we usually do like a really good job. And then Saturdays and Sundays are not so great. And so those 2 days are just as important as the other 5. And so if we throw those 2 out the window, we're just going to get more frustrated because we're not going to see the results. So it's really important to make sure that you're focusing every day of the week. And, I hate the word cheat meal or whatever. But if you're going out for ice cream with your friends or having pizza with your family, like by all means do that. But as long as it's not all the time, it's not a whole day. And that about 80% of the time you're eating really, really well, 20% of the time you're enjoying yourself, then you'll feel really good and you'll be able to really see some of that, some of those results.
So speaking of those cheat meals, how do I find the best alternatives for junk food that I might go to?
Ooh, so, and that all depends, like if you're a sweet or a salty, like you crave the sweet stuff or the salty stuff. So for the sweet tooth people, what I suggest, and this is what, I do myself because I'm a huge sweet tooth. I'll have, yeah, I know you remember that. So I'll do like a bowl of fruit and then I'll like just drizzle some Nutella on it. And then I'll put a little bit of Cool Whip and that's fine. Like it satisfies my sweet tooth, but I know I'm getting tons of nutrients because I'm getting more fiber, fluids from the fruit because it's such a high water content. And so you're kind of getting a little bit of everything you want, but you're not necessarily like eating, a ton of ice cream or whatever the case. If you're salty, you can do like tortilla chips and salsa. You just have to really portion it out. And so those are some of the things that can kind of get away from you. If you're crunchy, do like carrots with hummus or something along those lines. Just find or the baked chips if you're a salty tooth. Just whatever you're kind of looking for, find something that's going to meet that, but be a better alternative. So those are just a few examples: sweet, salty, crunchy, that you could substitute.
So it kind of goes along with the plate diagram. Like, what's the best way for us to balance our plates so that we aren't starving shortly after finishing our meal?
Yeah. So one of the ways is definitely to make sure you're getting a good fat at your meals. And a lot of times, and this is, I'm just as guilty of this when I educate, is focusing so much on carbs and protein that I forget to educate sometimes about the importance of the good fats. And so we can eat, vegetables and protein and brown rice, and then a few hour or like an hour later, we're starving again. Well, had you added some avocado or had a salad with some oil-based dressing or something like that, it will have a tendency to fill you up a lot longer. Or get some fish in your diet. If at nighttime you don't fill up that easily or you're hungry shortly after, then add a fatty fish for the protein at dinner. But that is important to get those good fats, not McDonald's fat, but your good heart healthy fats to help with satiety and make you feel fuller longer. And I mean, vegetables are kind of like a gimme. I mean, you can eat as much of them as you want and you're not going to go wrong there. But fat is definitely the one thing that is sometimes the forgotten macronutrient because we focus so much on carbohydrates and protein.
So along that avocado vein, we had a question about avocados. They're high in calories and fat, but supposedly very good for us. So what can you tell us about the fruit that is the avocado?
Oh man, in baseball, we go through some serious avocados. Like there has to be avocados at every single meal, mostly because of the Latin players, but then like everybody else thinks avocado toast is like a necessity. But avocados are really, really good. Multiple reasons. One, like we talked about, the heart healthy fat. But two, it can help decrease inflammation after workouts. So if you have a really, really hard workout and then you go home and you're going to have lunch, if you had a turkey and cheese sandwich with avocado, tomato, lettuce, and then apple slices and peanut butter, I mean, man, that is a legit recovery meal because you're getting the good fats from the peanut butter and the avocado, gets rid of that inflammation, helps recover more efficiently, will help you feel fuller longer. So just a lot of really good properties there. Yeah. Is it high calorie? Sure. Should you put 4 scoops of guacamole on your Chipotle? Probably not. So, which some of you guys are laughing because you're like, yeah, that's totally me. But it's a good food definitely to have in your arsenal without a doubt.
So we hear a lot of talk about macros. So do we track macros? Do we track calories, or do we eat to fuel ourselves?
So great question. I actually just had a cross-country runner that I met with today, and because I've thought about this question a bunch, and I go back and forth in baseball, like what makes the most sense. And with baseball, if any of you guys are baseball players, you love numbers, and sometimes those can be dangerous. So but the thing that I was talking with a cross-country runner today, and he's like, what is my goal in eating? Like, what am I really trying to do? And I thought about it and I'm like, you are trying to be intentional and purposeful with what you're eating. And so it has much, much less to do with how many calories, how many grams of protein, all that like fluffy stuff. It looks cool and it sounds cool because if we did CrossFit, then we want to talk macros because it's a really cool word, right? But in real life, eat with a purpose, fuel with a purpose. So with this runner today, he would just drink protein shakes and eat a Cliff Bar. And I'm like, that's not purposeful at all. Like having a goal and a purpose to fueling is stopping, thinking about it and saying, you know what? I'm hungry more than just a snack. I'm going to make myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and have a banana to go with it. That's eating with a purpose or fueling with a purpose. Being just like, I got to count my macros is like grabbing the protein shake and reading the label. Like, so you really have to, and again, it was one of those questions where I'm like, I just don't have like a really, like, I don't have the sexy answer that everybody's looking for. But to me, it's so much more about being intentional, knowing what your goals are, using yourself as a science project, making mistakes, eating too much of even good stuff and then going out to work out and throwing up. We make those mistakes, but that's like now when you're working out and practicing, those are the times to make the mistakes. And so, but that's what I would say, like fueling with a purpose, stopping, thinking about what you need. And one of the things that I do for myself too, like if I find myself hungry for something and I'll go into the pantry and I'm like, oh man, I could go for that box of Wheat Thins. But then I'm like, hold up. How many servings of fruit have I had today? When was the last time I had a good protein source? what did I have for breakfast? So again, just stopping for a second and thinking, and then I'll be like, okay, I'll put cheese cubes with the wheat thins, so I'm not just going to eat half the box. So it's just a matter of just taking a couple extra seconds to really think through what that looks like. Or, okay, I had my recovery an hour and a half ago. Now is lunchtime. I'm going to go to Chipotle. Okay, so maybe I will get guac on my burrito. I'm going to get black beans because I know I need a good fiber source. I'm going to get the brown rice because I just know that's better for me. So, you know, just thinking through some of those things is ultimately what is the most important. And that's what's going to make you feel the best. The numbers are great and they look fun, but they are tedious and they are exhausting.
So as athletes, how many times a day should I look to eat? And you've already talked a little bit about the plates, but how many times a day should I shoot for meals, or do I look at my day from a practice training standpoint?
Definitely from a practice training standpoint. So again, using the cross country runner just because it's fresh on my mind because I had him today. So our plan for him is breakfast, his recovery is his lunch, and then we're going to do 3 snacks, snack. He does his second run and then dinner. So it just depends on how your schedule is. So that's so, you know, it's so contradictory to the breakfast snack, lunch snack, dinner snack. But for him, like we needed to have him get enough fuel consistently during the day, but not feel sick when he's going to go out for his nighttime or his evening run. And so just obviously I would love for you to get for sure a good hearty breakfast, for sure a good dinner. And then whatever that looks like in between, your recovery and lunch might be the same thing. So you might have a smoothie and a sandwich or something as your recovery. So you might double dip sometimes. And so definitely look at your daily schedule and then basically like plan backwards, almost retro plan your fueling into that schedule. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It really doesn't. Everybody's going to have something different, and that's fine.
So we got a couple more athlete questions, and then we'll go to some from the coaches that encompasses a little bit more of the game day. So what supplements, if any, should athletes take?
Okay. Whew, how much time you got? Okay, so the must-have supplements, vitamin D. For me, that's a no-brainer, especially if you're outside a lot in the summertime. You're probably fine. But vitamin D, there's so much research. I think it's upwards of like 75% of the US population is vitamin D deficient. I mean, with our minor league players who live in the Dominican Republic and have sun all the time, we had 80% vitamin D deficiency with so if that's the case, probably most of us are vitamin D deficient. And so my recommendation is at least 2,000 units a day in the winter months. So if you're inside all the time now, then I would suggest the same, 2,000 units a day. And vitamin D helps absorb calcium into your bones. So if you're doing any sort of, endurance, track and field, cross country, anything along those lines, obviously calcium is incredibly important. And just for female athletes in general. Probably some of the most stress fractures that I saw when I was at Tennessee was women's basketball and cross country. Obviously cross country, but yeah, I mean, vitamin D deficiency was in every single one of them. So that's a must have. Probiotics are another one. And so the 3 things that I've really latched onto this year, early over the last year in baseball, the 3 main things: sleep, gut health, and brain health. And so those are just really, those 3 things are so intertwined and interlaced that you can't focus on one without focusing on the other 2. And so the probiotics, super important. So 70% of our immune system is found in our gut. And so we probably should take care of it. And so a probiotic is basically, it's a living microorganism. And it's an easy way to say it, it's the good guys. So when you take a probiotic, it's the good guys going in. They're living microorganisms. They get into your intestines, and they basically fight against the bad bacteria, the bad microorganisms, and get rid of them. And it sounds super weird and super gross. And yes, when you first start on a probiotic regimen, you probably will be in the bathroom a little bit more frequently. When I was at Tennessee, the football players would call them the pooping pill. So but it takes about 2 weeks for those good guys to start repopulating in your intestines so that your immune system gets stronger. Things that negatively affect your immune system, exercise and training in the heat. Yep, probably all of you. Travel, all of you. Aging, luckily you're not that old yet, but for some of you, maybe that's something that's hitting hard. Stress, probably got a little bit of that. Hydration or dehydration, that can be, so you guys are basically perfect guinea pigs to test this out on yourself, because you probably experienced many of those things, or also a couple other things. Any prescription medications, that stuff can mess up your intestinal tract. Any sort of chronic use of antacids or ibuprofen, anything like that. So all those things are going to negatively affect your gut. And so getting a good probiotic is going to be helpful. They are not cheap. I'm not going to lie and say they are. And actually, I just thought of this. I have a 60% off discount code for clean products. So I will text that to you in a little bit. And so Clean with a K, if you guys are familiar with that brand, great brand. They're all NSF certified for sport, and 60% off. You can't really beat that. So, but yeah, so those are going to be the two for sure that I'm all for. Oh man. Any of your pre-workouts, stuff like that, you just have to be careful. Because the thing with the supplement industry, and this is something that, I hit so hard with my athletes on, and then the school that Coach Ramey was talking about, I actually teach a sports nutrition class at that high school. We spend 2 weeks talking about supplements. And the thing that I pound into their heads is that the supplement industry is not regulated. They do not care what they really put in the product. They don't care if it works. They don't care if you die. They don't care if you have heart palpitations. They care about your money. And so you have to be so careful with those different products because there's some that can be really, really dangerous, many that can cause you to test positive on an NCAA drug test. And so, it happens all the time. And you just have to be really, really careful. And so anything with the NSF certified for sport label is going to be, it's third party tested, which means what is on the label is actually what is in the product. NSF has an app as well, and I would suggest you guys download that app just so you have it. There are some decent pre-workouts that are NSF certified for sport. Garden of Life has one that's called Energy and Focus. I like it because it's a very low dose of caffeine, and it also uses beet powder as basically as the vasodilator. So if you take a pre-workout where you feel tingly and itchy, it's not because the pre-workout's like extra so much better. It's beta alanine. That's it. And there's a lot of like conflicting research if you actually need beta alanine when you're lifting. So good. You felt itchy, but you paid for, to feel like you have bugs crawling on your face. So, but yeah, so pre-workout, it's a tricky one. Creatine, obviously a lot of guys are interested in taking creatine. Same thing, has to be an NSF certified for sport product. And my whole thing with creatine is if you can't do food right, then you're not responsible enough to start using creatine. So if you're skipping meals, you're only drinking protein shakes all day, and you're like, Coach Ramey, I'm going to start on this creatine protocol, she'll probably be like, cool, can I punch you in the throat now? Because it's not a good idea. Like, what did you eat for breakfast? So you have to do right by food first. I will always be a food first person before you can start, or you should start dabbling in some of that other stuff. It works. Creatine works. Tons of research, great research, but also research on people who have had like specific meal plans laid out for them, and they've done all the food first stuff and then also added creatine. So just got to be smart about that. Let's see. The fish oil is definitely going along with the gut health, brain health, sleep stuff. I'm a big fish oil person as well. There's so much new research, and that's why I like the eating fish, getting the avocado, the omega-3s and stuff, just from a brain health perspective, tons of research on autism, ADHD, depression, anxiety, and brain health. There's actually one super interesting article about kids in juvenile detention center, and they supplemented one group with omega-3s and another group with a placebo, and they found that the kids who were supplemented with omega-3s were calmer and had less violent situations within the detention center walls than the group that had the placebo. So just like from a calming the brain perspective, lots of really, really good research on omega-3s. So now that one's a tricky one because a good omega-3 is not cheap. Clean does have one as well. So there's that 60% off for you all again. Yeah, I'll have Coach Ramey get that information to you guys.
So we have a few of those really cool shake shops here in town that some people think that it's great to go get a shake in whatever tea they're selling and think that, oh, I'm an athlete, I should have this shake and then that's enough for me for the rest of the day or whatever. So what are your thoughts? Is that a good choice, bad choice, or terrible choice?
It's not a great choice at all, especially because most of those shake shops, you're like, I'll have a strawberry. And then they like squeeze the strawberry syrup and it's not even like real food. It's just a syrup. So yeah, I mean, I don't love those. And then you don't know what kind of protein they're putting in it. I mean, they're probably using some cheap bootleg protein because they can charge you $8 for a smoothie and they put 3 cents worth of protein in it. And so again, you're like, thinking you're doing yourself a lot of really good favors. You're like, I'm getting my protein and my carbs, and you got syrup and like, you know, dirt from the backyard garden. I mean, you just don't know what you're getting. So make your smoothie at home, buy yourself a blender and some frozen fruit, and get a good protein product. But I get it. Like if it's right after a workout, you're like, oh, this tastes really good and I feel like I'm recovering. Yeah, no, I don't know how else to say it.
All right. If you guys have questions, you can throw them in the chat to me in the bottom, and then we'll open it up at the end. I'm going to get into a few more kind of game day situations for our coaches, and then also just so athletes can plan also. Is there a specific time that we should eat before and after games? You know, you've kind of got your pregame meal, then you get to the gym for warm-up. Like how should we work on timing up our pregame and postgame meals?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's almost like a 2-phase answer. So typically your pregame meal is 3 to 4 hours before your game time, which is normal, makes sense. It's, you know, that hasn't changed over the last 20 years. Now, one of the things that over the course of time, what I started to do is just think through, okay, I'm like, okay, 4 hours before, by the time that game actually starts, they're going to be hungry again. So now you have to consider a snack like right before game time if you're feeling hungry. A lot of it is going to be based on you as an athlete, what you can tolerate. I mean, I've seen some athletes that are like, if I eat anything before the game, I'm going to absolutely throw up. Some that are like, I am starving. Why can't I have something before I go out and play? And so I would do 2 phases. You have your pregame meal 3 to 4 hours before, and then provide some sort of small snack for those who need it before that game actually starts. And that could be anything from, you know, the Quaker Chewy granola bars or Nature Valley granola bars. If you want to do more like Honey Stinger waffles type stuff, the Cliff Z Kids bars, those to me are, I mean, because it's like, it's a small enough bar to where you know you had something, but not so much to where you can feel it when you go out and play. And so that's kind of the what I have athletes gauge. Like they'll say, I'm hungry, but I don't want to eat too much. And so I say, okay, so you eat enough to know you had something, but not so much to where you feel it when you're going to play. You could have half a banana. You could have, you know, half a pack of peanut butter crackers. But sometimes that 4 hours is just too long. Like some athletes just get really, really hungry, you know, an hour before the game starts or the match or whatever. And so providing some sort of small snack might not be a bad idea. And I've seen it help a lot of athletes just be able to, you know, get through. And then at halftime, they might finish their peanut butter and crackers or the other half of the banana. But it's just the continuous refueling that kind of helps them get through. So that's what I would suggest, is the 2-phase type thing.
So is there any specific types of meals for the night before or pregame that we should focus on?
Yeah, and this is obviously, it's different for different sports, because when I was at Tennessee, if I did the same night before meal for basketball every game, they probably would have had some serious things to say, because it's a lot of games and that's a lot of the same meal over and over. Football, there's 12 games, so it's not as big of a deal to have the same thing every Friday night. But I would say, just one of the things I would do is pick your 3 staple carbohydrates, your 3 staple vegetables. Always have fruit. One of the things that I always did as well, just from a visual standpoint, is I would always put fruit at the beginning of the line, because I knew the athletes would start filling up their plate with colors. Whereas if I put the protein first, they would get 3 chicken breasts, and then they're not getting enough carbs or enough nutrients from fruits and vegetables that they need to actually get through that game or that match, whatever the case is. And so I would put fruit and the vegetable first, and then the carb, and then the protein last. And so if your 3 carb sources are rice, potato, pasta, and then you always have a bread or whatever, pick that. If your 3 proteins are chicken, shrimp, or some sort of, fish, and then I would say steak, but it's not like we're all eating steak the night before we compete. But you could do, or just different varieties of chicken, stuff like that, but to keep stuff on a rotation. And so as long as it's consistent, I think that's the most important thing, is the consistency. It's not like, we got to have pasta the night before because that's what's going to get us through. No, if you have just a good carbohydrate source, a baked potato, a sweet potato, the brown rice, the pasta, whatever you choose, and you rotate a few different options, that's what's ultimately going to be most beneficial. But like I said, the setup of how you, and I don't know what buffets look like now anymore. I mean, that's probably all a thing of the past. And so, that's going to be, man, I don't even know what that's going to look like, but still, the way you can set up your line, make it appealing to the eye, because that sometimes can be more, it can have a bigger impact than on the actual food itself. If it looks appealing, then it's good for me and it's going to fuel me well. So I'm not sure if that completely answers the question.
Play off some of that. How many, or what types of restaurants, or any specific restaurant suggestions from that?
Just for pregame, or for
either pregame and night before type?
Yeah. For pregame, like if you can get any sort of deals or specials with any of like your local restaurants, I suggest, like, we had Rafferty's was one of our restaurants that I would always use when I was at Tennessee. And so they would cut us a deal, and I would rotate different menu options, and also take a look. Just because it's a steakhouse doesn't mean they're only serving steak. Some of those restaurants, because they want your business, they'll be like, yeah, we don't have pasta, but we will make you pasta. So that's one way too, to kind of work with the budget that you have. Look for some of those restaurants that may, we had a steakhouse do our breakfast when I was at Tennessee sometimes, because they wanted the business. So they went ahead and made us eggs and pancakes and stuff like that. We got a great deal on it for some of our sports that didn't have the same budget that football did. Because they just were willing to work with us. So, if you are at home and you have that ability to really glean from some of those different restaurants, the mom and pop places that want to have some business, they will, like, you don't have to look at the menu and be like, oh, that's all they have. You can look at the menu and say, hey, could you also do this? Could you also provide something else? Can you give us some fresh fruit? That's a huge one. Like, some of those restaurants will be like, absolutely, we'll do a fresh fruit tray. That's no problem. So just keep that stuff in mind, because it doesn't always have to be sandwiches. Because I think a lot of times we get caught up in like, oh, good, we got a sandwich for pregame meal again. You know, I think the soccer team did that almost every game, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we don't have to have sandwiches again. So, you know, let's try to be a little bit different.
So,
but I mean, sandwiches are fine too. You get burnt out after a while. Sorry, go ahead.
So for post game, if we play a late game, or if baseball, softball play double headers that get rain delays, go late into the evening, restaurants close at 10. Like what are some of your recommendations for those really late night games when we're getting on a bus and coming straight home, or maybe getting on a bus and going to our next game to play?
Yeah, that is tough, because I read that question and I'm like, okay. So again, there's a couple different answers. So sometimes there's no perfect answer. Sometimes you have a Wendy's, right? And sometimes you have a Wendy's and everybody gets $10 to spend. That doesn't get you very far. So one thing I would suggest, and we do this for our minor league players, is we have a bin on the bus. It's the snack bin. And so if you can get, some of your boosters or some sort of donor or a parent who provides, because we do for our minor league players, we have the team boosters, and they provide the snacks for that bin. So they'll get granola bars, they'll get trail mix, they'll get like I don't know if you ever had That's It bars, or like whole fruit bars. They'll bring fresh fruit. They'll do all that stuff for us to have on the bus. They'll get that little Jif to go peanut butters. And so we have that. So that can be a backup supply. So say you are going to a Wendy's and you're like, I only have $10. I need to get as much food as I can, but you have this bin and you're like, okay, in the bin, I'm going to get a trail mix, a granola bar, then I'm going to get a grilled chicken sandwich, and I'm going to get a small fry. So now you've completed that meal. You didn't get stuck getting 3 double cheeseburgers and a large fry, because you were so hungry, you had to get as much as you could with that small amount of money, but you were able to still get a good fuel source. Fries, fine, fair, right? Maybe I'll get a Frosty. I don't know. Depends, right? But then you still got a good quality snack to kind of top it off. And so it's really about using resources and reaching out to anyone that's willing to just, lend a hand. And so I get the small budgets and stuff, but that snack bin has, oh my goodness, come in handy so many times, especially when those guys have 10-hour bus rides.
So going off of the whole game situation, so everybody warms up, gets ready to play. Some athletes play 3 minutes, some play 35 in a basketball game, or some play 10 minutes and some play 90 in a soccer game. Or you have a pitcher in softball who pitches the doubleheader. And then you might have someone who pinch runs, and that's all they did over a course of a doubleheader. Do we need to look at refueling them differently?
Yes, but I also think that's a responsibility of the athlete. So they need to be the one that takes some responsibility on themselves and says, I did not play much, therefore I may be hungry, but do I really need this much? And that's where a lot of times the season can get away from you as an athlete, is when you are eating the same amount as your teammate who played 4 times more than you did. And it's hard because they're eating a lot and you're hungry too, and you want to eat a lot. So it's hard to resist and to just not partake. But it's really one of those things from an accountability standpoint. You have to think, how am I fueling? And what is my purpose? Again, fuel with a purpose, right? Like I played 3 minutes and I'm eating the 3 double cheeseburgers and the large fry, and is that a really good idea? And my teammate who played the whole game is, getting the Frosty and the grilled chicken sandwich and, the fruit cup, and then having the trail mix and the granola bar on the bus. And you're like, so a lot of that has to be the responsibility of the athlete to really challenge themselves. Like, and as a coach, you don't want to be like, do you really need that? Because that's probably not a great approach either. But, it's one of those things at the beginning of the season where that discussion can be had. Like, we want you to fuel for your activity so that you can be the best performer possible, which means you have to have some accountability and take the responsibility on yourself to know what that looks like. And if you need some guidance, here's your resources. Go talk to Coach Ramey. She'll get a handout from Allison or something. But yeah, it is different. It 100% is different. Now, If that athlete did extra work and they did, you know, a treadmill workout or they hit the weight room or something like that, maybe, but still the intensity is not the same as a competition is.
So rough ballpark estimate, how much would it cost weekly to adequately provide a player with protein and food that they would need to perform?
Man, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me this question. I was hoping you'd skip that one. So are we talking like the school provide or like that they out of their own budget, what they have to?
I think it would probably a little bit for just like, you know, a student athlete, you know, shopping that's getting their allotment check, or maybe if a team is able to help out their teams a little bit more, you know, our smaller roster teams might have a little bit more flexibility with that.
Okay. So grocery store, if you are shopping, I would say, how many meals are provided there, like on campus? I guess that's none.
If kids have meal plans, they, you know, they can go through the cafeteria 3 times, but that's
if they do.
If they have a meal plan or if they live off campus, it's all pretty widely variable.
Okay. I would say, like, if you're grocery shopping for yourself, and I hate to say this because I spend this much on me and 3 children, but you guys are athletes. Like, you are doing a lot of stuff, but it's going to be about $75 a week to really fuel. But there's also a lot of ways to save. I mean, if you have a grocery store that has an app, I mean, use coupons. It's a huge bonus. Buy frozen fruit instead of fresh fruit because 1, it won't spoil. 2, it's cheaper. 3, you can get fruit that's out of season and still use it. And so same with vegetables. You can buy frozen vegetables for $1 a bag. You know, your most expensive stuff is going to be your protein for sure. And so, you know, whether that's eggs or your chicken or fish or beef or whatever you're going to get. But I would say, you know, and maybe $75, you're like, I don't need that much. I shop on $40 a week. Then that's awesome. But if you can use a really good combination, if you have a meal plan and really be smart about the way you use that and then complement that with some groceries, I think that's huge. From like a team providing meals or providing money a day, I wouldn't even know how to guess that because I don't know cost of like anything really there. So that's a much tougher one because what I want to say is probably, I mean, just because it is so important. You know, we talk about food and nutrition and all that stuff so much. And so many times people are like, what you do in the weight room is great, but if you don't complement it with like refueling, recovering, and you know, taking care of yourself, then all that stuff is out the window. Or same with practice. And so it's tough, but I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't even know how to guess, honestly. But from a grocery standpoint, I think for the most part, most people can probably get a lot done with $75 a week. And it is a lot. I know that it is a lot.
So one of the questions from a coach was, how do we figure out metabolism? We have some that can eat a ton and never gain an ounce, and then we have some that don't eat that much or say they don't eat much and gain a lot of weight.
This question made me laugh because this is like the parents of the high schoolers will say this all the time too. And so the first thing is like the definition of eating all the time, the perception of the athlete and what they think is eating all the time might be they ate lunch and it was 1,500 calories. Then they went to practice. Then they did all their treatment, rehab, finished off in the weight room. And then they finally got dinner at like 9, and that was another 1,500 calories. So that was 3,000 calories. The thought is I ate a ton, but the reality was it was 3,000 calories and you needed 4,000. So it's, you know, did you really eat all day, eat all the time? Probably not. And then on the flip side, like you said, Coach Ramey, did you really not eat that much, or were you actually eating a lot all the time? And so I think perception and reality are not always the same. And so that's one thing that I would challenge you as coaches to say, okay, you eat all the time. Walk me through that. What did you eat for breakfast? Oh, you woke up at 11 and you had a bowl of cereal? Oh, so then now it's 2:30. What have you had since then? Oh, a chocolate milk? Huh. Wow. So you know what I mean? So like as the conversation continues, the realization is like, oh, maybe you weren't eating all day. Just because you eat from the time practice ends to the time you go to bed doesn't mean you were eating the 12 hours before that. And so with the metabolism, that's one of the reasons why we stopped looking at body fat with baseball, is just because the different body types are so different from the way that they're just put together and from genetics and all that stuff. It was just too unfair, for lack of a better word, to give players body fat goals, because it just didn't make sense. One thing too, to challenge those players who say they eat meat and can't gain weight, is how much fast food are you eating? Because saturated fat does have a tendency to blunt the ability to produce testosterone. And so, you know, especially for guys who are trying to gain weight, I will never forget this. I tell this story every year in my class. I had one defensive back when I was at Tennessee, and he ate McDonald's, I kid you not, 3 times a day. And he would say, I can't gain weight, Miss Allison, I'm eating all the time. So I got him to change one meal. He ate breakfast at home, and it was like cereal. It didn't matter. It just wasn't the saturated fat. And he actually started gaining weight. So just the fact of what kind of fuel are you putting in? Is it going to be the most optimal fuel to get that weight on? In men's basketball, women's basketball, probably they're the drive-through sport. It's the AAU sport. And so they're eating fast food all the time. Just because they're eating 2,000 or 3,000 calories of Zaxby's doesn't mean that that is going to be a functional fuel source for adequate weight gain.
So what are some budget-friendly methods to fuel our really large rosters? So baseball's pretty big and getting bigger. Softball's got a pretty good number. Track and field, you know, which those athletes are on like such a wide spectrum on what they're actually doing on meet days. A lot of times with track and field, they go with more of the snack method, because a lot of times when they would get boxed lunches, they would go to waste. Kids wouldn't eat them. So a lot of times for the big meets, I order them a bunch of Cliff Bars, and that's what they take with them. And then they get a bunch of fruit and do a little bit of sandwich stuff. So if they need something a little more substantial, that's what they go with. But what are some good ideas for those all day doubleheader games, budget friendly type deals?
Like meals, or like things they can pack? Okay. So this is one thing, and coaches probably will not love to hear this, but before I got the job at the Pirates, I interviewed for another Major League Baseball team. And one of their questions was, so if we have $25 a day to spend on our minor league team, what can you get with $25 to feed 40 people? And my response was, what can you get with $25 to feed 40 people? And they were like, well, like we get some bread and peanut butter and jelly. And I'm like, me too. That's what I would do. And so if your budget is small, I can't make it any bigger than what you already have. Like, food costs money. And so yes, we want budget friendly stuff, but also if it's that important, like nobody can we can't feed the 5,000 with 2 loaves of bread and 3 fish. Right. And so $25 is going to get the strength coaches at the minor league team the same thing that I'm going to get, because it just doesn't multiply. And so, it's tough, because your sandwich stuff is always the cheapest. And so that's also the stuff that's probably the most boring. What gets tricky with those all day meats is everything that's like shelf stable is so high in carbs, which is great, except when that's all you're eating all day long. Then you feel by the time you're at your finals for your race or whatever a competition you have, you're so bloated from all the carbs you ate all day, or you're starving because you didn't want to eat it all day, that you've really set yourself up for a potentially poor performance. And so my first encouragement is to find a little bit more money, glean from somewhere else to just be able to provide more for the athletes. And one of the things that we started doing with track and field, my intern, she would travel with track, And so when they would get to whatever city they were in, they would have a cooler. And so just so it wasn't all shelf stable or like, you know, carbohydrate stuff all day long, she would go buy string cheeses, yogurts, lunch meat, and stuff like that, and keep a cooler with that stuff in it, just so that they had another option, just so that they could make a sandwich and have a piece of fruit with it, rather than just like, here's my peanut butter crackers again. I guess I'll eat my 4th pack of peanut butter crackers today, and I'm going to have another Cliff Bar. So I'm on Cliff Bar number 4, and I have another race and another heat. So that's something you can do too. Yes, it takes extra manpower. It takes extra work to send someone to the store to go buy some things. But I think the reward on the back end is pretty beneficial, because, you know, they can go to the concession stand and get a hot dog, or they can come and grab some stuff from the cooler, and then, you know, they can have cheese and crackers, or, you know, they can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or they can have a Greek yogurt and throw some granola in it or something like that. So, but it's tough. I get it. Those all day events are long. And also what I would encourage is for your athletes to really find their fueling strategies for those long day events. So that can also, from a budget perspective, save money, because they're not eating out of boredom. They're eating with a purpose. Again, the whole fuel with a purpose. And so they may not need 4 Cliff Bars in a day anyway. They just did because they're like, man, I got another hour, I'll have a Cliff Bar. So getting them to understand, like, why are you eating? Are you fueling with a purpose, or are you bored? So that can help the budget too, a lot of times.
This one came from our chat. This can also be an all-day conversation like supplements. Can you give us the Cliff Notes version of alcohol on performance?
Oh, goodness. Oh, I mean, I'm not going to tell any of you that it's okay, just for the record. Like, it's so just the basics. The first thing, first and foremost, like I mentioned, sleep. Like, alcohol intake affects your sleep. And so, yes, you might fall asleep and be in bed for 12 hours, but it messes up your resting heart rate and your natural stages of sleep. So when you wake up, a lot of times you don't feel rested, because you're not. Like, you're still in a funk, and your body is still trying to figure out why it's feeling the way it's feeling. And not only that, when you consume alcohol, your liver has to do all kinds of work, right? So your liver's like, holy cow, you had this 4th meal from cookout, but you had a lot of alcohol. So hold up now. Okay. First, I'm going to take care of the alcohol, and then I'll work on that really crappy food you followed up with. So now we're looking at, it's about, I mean, if you have a really hard night of drinking, it's about 72 hours before you actually are ready to get back into the swing of things. Like, sometimes you feel great and you're like, man, I had the best workout after that night out. Yeah, like in your head you did, but not from an internal physiological perspective. So yeah, I mean, if you're of age and you have a drink, that's probably not going to affect you. But if it's one of those things where you're like, every chance I get, I'm going out and I'm hitting it hard, there's not a good answer for you that's going to come out of my mouth. It's just, I mean, dehydration, and then increased risk of injury, and then bone health. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And then you mix energy drinks with the alcohol. So you have a stimulant and a depressant, and then,
I think one of my favorite pregame was NO Explode and a couple 5-hour energies with a pregame meal of spaghetti. That looked good on the sideline.
I'm sure it did.
Got here.
Did you ask him how it tasted the second time?
It was bad.
I'm sure it was.
So any of you have any more questions for Allison? We're kind of through our list. So you can either raise your hand. I can see most of you that have screens, or shoot it in the chat.
Let me hit on the sleep a little bit, just because I talked about the brain and the gut. So with sleep, it's so important to make sure that you're getting enough, obviously. And what enough is, 8 hours is obviously ideal. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that a full sleep cycle is between 90 and 110 minutes. And so during that full sleep cycle, that's when you release growth hormone. That's when you make memories. That's when the stuff that you learned from either classes or from practice, all that stuff gets set and locked in to your long-term memory. And so also you recover, all kinds of stuff. If you are going to take a nap, do not nap after 5 p.m. And that's just because it's going to affect your ability to fall asleep at night. If you take a nap, do not either take a power nap or a full sleep cycle nap. So if you ever take like a 2-hour nap and you wake up and you're like, I feel worse than when I went to bed, that's because you ended up waking up in the middle of a second sleep cycle. And so your body just wasn't ready. So that like a 20-minute nap or less is going to be ideal, or a full 90 minutes of sleep, or an hour or 3 hours. So in that phase. And so the 20 minutes, you're in your stage 1 of sleep. And that's where it's enough to just be rested, but where it's easy to wake you up. And so keep that in mind. One of the things that I would do with football, we would always stay like an hour away from whatever stadium we were playing at. And so I would send them all a text and I would say 20 minutes or less, or not at all. 20 minutes or less, or not at all. Because I noticed for so long, and I couldn't figure out why, but they would just get off the bus like bobbleheaded because they had slept for like 45 minutes of the 1-hour bus ride. And, you know, it just took them a long time to like get out of that. They called it basically a sleep hangover, to get past that sleep hangover when they got to the locker room and dressed and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind when you're napping, but really try to shoot for that 8 hours of sleep, because it is important. If you have to nap if you get 5 hours at night and you nap for an hour and a half during the day, then you're at 6.5. So that's good. Yes, you can make up a little bit for it, but getting 3 hours every night and then sleeping 12 hours on weekends, that's not ideal. So get your sleep.
So we've got a couple more questions. So for our plant-based athletes, what are some of your top tips for them feeling, and also just kind of snack ideas for either your plant-based or vegan athletes?
Oh, plant-based. Oh man, you guys all watched Game Changers, didn't you?
I shared your response with a lot of people.
So, okay. Plant-based, my first question is, why are you plant-based? I don't hate it. If you love it and you're rolling with it and you can afford it and you're doing it right, then by all means be plant-based. Biggest suggestions there, you're going to have to supplement with definitely some B vitamins. You're going to be missing out on some iron also. And don't supplement with iron unless you've been diagnosed with an iron deficiency. But just keep in mind that it's really, really hard to get all the essential vitamins and minerals that you need if you are being plant-based. So you're going to have to be taking some sort of multivitamin for sure. So, okay, what was the first question? Like, what are my ideas? Sorry, I just got hung up on Game Changers in my head for a second.
For just fueling for our plant-based vegan athletes.
Yeah. Also keep in mind, and I did this demo because we have a bunch of pitchers that wanted to be plant-based this spring training. And so one of them was like, are you being passive aggressive? Because what I did was I would put 2 plates together. So I'd put 1 plate of like shrimp and then 1 plate of rice and beans. And so the shrimp had 17 grams of protein, and then the rice and beans was 17 grams of protein. But I wanted them to see the calorie count and the quantity of food that it took of each of those 2 things to have 17 grams of protein. And so the plate was like, it was like 1 full cup of black beans and 1 full cup of rice, or 6 shrimp. And so they were like, why are you being so passive aggressive? I said, because I don't want to have a bunch of fat pitchers, because you all want to be plant-based. And if you want to, that's fine. But it takes a lot of carbs to get all the essential amino acids that you need. And you could easily get it from like 3 ounces of salmon, or 3 ounces of chicken. Now, if it's some sort of like, I have been a vegan my whole life, I believe in this, I'm passionate about it, then you probably eat a lot of tofu. So, you know, and that's going to be probably one of your main sources. You know, you can do black bean burgers and stuff like that. Like vegetarian and vegan, very big difference. Vegan, it's a lot harder to find really good sources of food because you can't have anything with eggs. Eggs are used as a binder in a lot of different foods. But I mean, it's possible. It's just a lot of work and it's really expensive. But I would just encourage you to, you're just going to have to get a lot of, you know, pea protein and, you know, soy protein and stuff like that to be able to accommodate for what your protein needs are. And then snacks too. I mean, you know, if you're going to be drinking soy milk or almond milk and all different types of stuff like that, there's not a whole lot of, I mean, peanut butter is going to be probably your main snack option really. So I can get more ideas of that because I'm not vegan. I really love meat. I love a big fat steak. Like, so it's just hard for me.
This goes back a little bit to the ones that say I'm not eating that much, but I'm still gaining weight. I think one thing that a trap that some of them fall into is what they're drinking. They don't think about the calories from their drinks. So could you talk a little bit about, you know, coffee, Gatorade, soft drinks, how all of that fits into your life as a college athlete?
Yeah, for sure. And so obviously Gatorade or sports drinks, it's, you know, my philosophy is before, during, after practices or hard workouts. You don't necessarily need a sports drink if you're in the weight room and you just have a lift. But especially now when it's so flipping hot, before, during, and after, but scrolling through your phone, watching Netflix, like, don't need Gatorade or any sort of sports drink. And then sodas, I mean, I can't say enough negative things about sodas. There's just not a lot of really great qualities about it. So, I mean, empty calories, lots of sugar, carbonation isn't good for your bones. I mean, what else do you want to hear about how much it's bad? So, and then juices too. The perception is that juice is good because it's a fruit. I refuse to buy juice for my children. They only get juice if they're at like some other kid's birthday party and they're like, man, I got a Capri Sun. I'm like, congratulations, because you'll never see one in this house. But it's not fruit. It's a concentrated form of what apple is gold? I mean, like, when you squeeze an apple, when does it turn gold? I don't know. So what is apple juice? If it says on the bottle, apples, water, then I'm like, cool, that's apple juice. If it's like from concentrate, well, then I don't know what it is. So yeah, the juices and stuff, just, I mean, if you need something with flavor, one thing, if you're going to go buy some frozen fruit, I would encourage you to use that as ice cubes. So throw some frozen fruit in your water bottle and now you have fruit infused water. Genius. So, you know, that's an easy way to do it.
What about coffee?
Okay. Coffee is fine unless you're adding all kinds of, you know, thick, heavy creams and milks and sugars and all kinds of stuff. Like, just, I'm a coffee drinker. And so, but my rule for myself is coffee in the morning is fine. I don't want to drink coffee at all times of the day because I don't want it to affect my sleep. Some people will say, oh, I could drink coffee right before bed and still be fine. You might feel fine going to bed, but you don't know what your resting heart rate is doing at night. And that's where it can get a little bit wonky, is what's really happening when you're sleeping. But yeah, black coffee is fine. Throw a little creamer in it if you need, a little bit of milk. I had one of my minor league players ask me the other day, what do you think about Splenda? Because I've been putting Splenda in my coffee. I said, I'd rather you put a full fat, full sugar, like tablespoon of creamer in it for the flavoring rather than an artificial sweetener to make it taste sweet. So, you know, if that's your thing, I used to be a Diet Coke drinker. Like, I had my Diet Coke one a day, and I just finally got to the point where I'm like, what am I doing? This is like, it's man-made. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to break it down normally like I would real food. So stop drinking it. So any of your artificial sweeteners, if you can keep away from those when you're drinking your coffee beverages, that is going to be ideal.
So one more from one of the student athletes on, is there a benefit to limiting how much red meat that you eat?
I would say if you have family history of heart disease and that sort of thing, then yeah. But if you're generally healthy, you know, you don't have any family history, that sort of thing, then I wouldn't, as long as you're not eating ribeyes and like fatty steaks all the time, I mean, you'll be fine. Like if you have beef tacos one night, 2 nights later, you know, you have a steak with your family, and then a couple nights later, you're having a burger with like 90% lean ground beef, like you'll be fine.
So staff question from Athletic Performance, is Donut Friday okay if we're plotting?
Well, it's funny you say that. I used to have, with my kids, I'd bring them to school and we'd have Donut Friday. So we'd stop at the gas station and get donuts on the way to school. It's 80-20, right? 80% of the time you're eating really, really well. You're fueling well. Maybe Donut Friday is part of the 20. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions for Allison? No one?
All right.
And my assistant just said, she okay Donut Friday.
If it fits in the 80-20, that's what I'm saying. That's my asterisk by it.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming to this. And I've got this recorded, so I'll be able to share it with everybody so we can all go back to our notes and share with our other teammates that were not able to make it tonight. But thank you, Allison, for giving us your time. And hopefully she gets back to playing some baseball real soon.
Seriously, I'm over this.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see ya.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.